So today I'm going to be talking all about skinks. So there are a ton of different subspecies of blue-tongued skinks. So a lot of the time people buy a blue-tongued skink and they think that there's just one rule book to go by, and that's very false. So it's very important to know which subspecies you have. That way you can provide the proper humidity and husbandry that that skink requires. In today's video, I'm going to go through 12 subspecies of blue-tongued skinks and give you a little description and let you guys know what they look like, because a lot of the time I get questions and people don't know what type of a blue-tongued skink they have. So hopefully this video can clear it up a bit, because I know it's really confusing because there's so many different subspecies. So I'm going to be starting with my blue-tongued skink here. This is a classic Indonesian blue-tongued skink, also known as the Tiliqua Gigas. And he is very feisty, as you can see. He doesn't like being held. So I'm actually going to try and feed him a little bit of food to see if he'll calm down. Yeah, that's food. Yeah, nummies. So I want him to start realizing that me taking him out will actually mean food to tame him down, because he's just terrified of being held. So, and he's also wild caught. So it's really important for him to just learn to calm down when I'm holding him and just get some food in him. The Indonesians are very commonly wild caught. They're just very hard to breed in captivity, so it's really hard to find them. So he's a wild caught, and I'm going to put him back. So this is him. He's super cute. So I don't want to hold him for the entire video because, as you can see, he hates being held. With time, hopefully he'll calm down and not be as feisty. Obviously, a wild-caught animal is going to be way more feisty than a captive bred. And as I mentioned earlier, the Indonesians are just all wild-caught because they're very hard to breed, so there aren't many in captivity that are captive bred. So I wasn't aware when I bought him, but that's a whole other story. So the classic Indonesian blue-tongued skink, just like Chancho, requires a 60 to 80% humidity level. So that's something that's very important to keep in mind. A lot of the different subspecies have a different humidity requirement, so it's very important to know which one you have. So the classic Indonesian is 60 to 80%. Another distinct way that you can tell them apart from others is by their coloring. They do have the black bands. They're kind of skinny black bands that go down their body. They're kind of yellowish, kind of greenish tinted color as well, which also is very different than all the other subspecies, and it really sets them apart. They also have these little black markings on the very top of their head. It kind of runs through their scales and kind of looks a little bit like veins, and that's just another distinct feature of the classic Indonesian blue-tongued skink. Another thing that's really important about blue-tongued skinks, the Indonesians, one way to tell them apart from all the other subspecies are the Indonesians are going to have the black legs. So if they have solid black legs, it's going to be an Indonesian, and that's usually going to mean that they're going to need a higher humidity level requirement. If they have very pale looking legs, those are probably going to be more along the northerns, and they're going to require the lower humidity level. But I'm going to go through the list of all of these to be sure that you know exactly which one you have, so that we are giving it the proper humidity and care that it needs. The Tiliqua Gigas also usually runs between $125 to $250, and as I mentioned earlier, most of them are wild caught. It's kind of impossible to find a captive bred. So that's just something to keep in mind, and because of that, you may end up having health issues if you get a wild caught animal. So honestly, I wouldn't recommend these for people to look for and try to buy. There's definitely other skinks that I'll mention further on down the line that are better for pets. I still love Chancho though. He's still my little baby. I don't regret him whatsoever. He is the best, and he will come around with time. Just got to keep taking him out to feed him a little bit, so that way he's not terrified of my hand anymore. So there is another blue-tongued skink that has the same exact scientific name, Tiliqua Gigas, but it is the Halmahera. So the Halmahera is usually reddish in coloring. Sometimes it's gray, and it has thin black markings on its head, similar to the classic Indonesian blue-tongued skink. They also have a black or a black and white belly, so that's one way to tell them apart from other blue-tongued skinks. These guys require 80 to 100% humidity levels, so they require the highest humidity of all of the subspecies of blue-tongued skinks. So that's very important if you have this type of a skink. make sure that you are giving them that super, super high humidity level. These blue-tongued skinks are usually $125 to $250. The next type of skink that I'm going to be covering is the Tiliqua Gigas Evanescens. And they're also known as the Merauke. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly or not, so I'm doing my best. I'm probably going to butcher a lot of names today because I'm just totally just winging it. I don't think I've really heard a lot of these terms said out loud before, so I'm trying my best. But the Tiliqua Gigas Evanescens requires the 60 to 80% humidity, so that is very high again. They have a calmer disposition more than a lot of the other Indonesian blue-tongued skinks. It's very typical for Indonesian blue-tongued skinks to have a little bit of a feistier attitude. Again, that's just because most of them are wild caught and they haven't been really established in captivity yet. But they do have freckling on both arms and legs. They have kind of a salmony orange colored belly with little to no freckling. And something about these ones is that they have the longest abdomen and tail of all of the Tiliqua species. They usually run from $225 to $300. And I see these pretty often in the pet trade. So I think these are being more captive bred, and that is why they have more of a less feisty attitude than the other Indonesian blue-tongued skinks. So the next skink is the Tiliqua Gigas Keyensis or Key Island blue-tongued skink. They require a 60 to 80% humidity, so again, it's a pretty high humidity. Very important to make sure that you're giving the proper humidity to the proper skink. They have a very unique freckling that extends from the head. They have kind of a dark caramelish coloring, and they usually run from $125 to $250. And the next skink up is the Tiliqua Nigrolutea, also known as the Blotched blue-tongued skink, so that's much easier to say. These are probably one of my favorite subspecies of the blue-tongued skinks. They are so gorgeous. They do require a lower humidity level, which is actually easier to take care of. So they require a 40 to 50% humidity level. They grow up to be 24 inches long. They tend to have longer lifespans than the other skinks, and they usually can live up to like 30 years. They are seriously like the brightest skinks in my opinion. They just really stand out. The contrast of the black and the orange is just so pretty. They're just really, really cool. But just because they're that awesome, they have a very, very big price tag. So these guys usually go for $2,000 to $2,500. So they're beautiful, but they're pretty expensive, but I think they're worth it. So the next skink up has a really cool name. They are the Tiliqua Multifasciata, also known as the Centralians. So these ones require a lower humidity level, that's 20 to 40%. They're usually 15 to 18 inches with a short tail, a really stout body, and a really large and round head. They have distinct black bands behind each eye, and they also have black bands along the body, and they tend to be yellow, orange, red, or even light brown. These guys also have a very, very big price tag. They usually go for $4,500 to $5,000. The next skink up is the Tiliqua Occipitalis, also known as the Western blue-tongued skink. These guys have a lower humidity level of 20 to 40%, which is pretty easy to attain. They have a short tail, really thick, bold black bands behind each eye. They have thick black banding along the body, and they grow to be about 20 inches. They're pretty expensive also. These guys go for about $4,500. This is gonna be rough. So the next one up, I don't know if I can even say this word. I'm trying really hard. The Tiliqua Scincoides Chimaera, also known as the Tanimbar blue-tongued skink. These guys require another high humidity level, so this one's gonna be 60 to 80%. They have really hard, glossy scales. They're known to be very feisty in temperament, and they're typically silver, gray, or yellow, and they run for $175 to $250. I think they're really unique looking. I don't know if it's their scales or what it is about them, but I think that they're really cool looking skinks. So the next one up has a similar scientific name that I'm probably gonna butcher again. The Tiliqua Scincoides intermedia, also known as the northern blue-tongued skinks. And these are the most common blue-tongued skinks. These are the ones that you see in the pet trade. They're very commonly captive bred, very easy to find. If you want a blue-tongued skink, this is the skink I would recommend, just because it is going to be captive bred. And because they're captive bred, they have the best temperament of all of them. They're just very, very calm. They're like little dogs compared to my feisty little chanchos, so I think that is just better for the pet trade. They also require a lower humidity level, so they're easier to take care of. They have 40 to 60% humidity level. They're also yellow or orange. They have oval splotches on their sides of different colors. And there are many different morphs because these guys have been bred like crazy, and there are some crazy morphs out there. They're just really, really beautiful. There's a lot of variety, and they usually run from $250 to $300, so it's really not bad, and it's definitely worth it to get a captive bred, healthy animal that's gonna have a good demeanor. The next skink is the Tiliqua Scincoides, also known as the Eastern blue-tongued skink. It is really hard to say that word twice in a row. Scincoides. I don't know why I'm focusing on this so much, but man. Okay, anyway, these guys require a 40 to 60% humidity level, so it's definitely different than the other ones that are typically higher or lower. They're kind of like in the middle. They usually get 18 to 24 inches. They're the most common blue-tongued skink in Australia, so because of that, they're gonna be really cheap in Australia, but they're pretty expensive here. They have dark, bold, black bands behind their eyes, and they're usually $750 to $800 here, and I'm sure that they're so much cheaper on the other side of the world just because they're so common there. My friend lives in New Zealand, and her skink was so cheap compared to what we have here, so, and that's definitely what she has, is the Eastern. So it's just really cool how around the world, depending on where you are, reptiles, their availability is just so different in comparison, along with their prices. I believe like her skink was super cheap. I can't remember how much it was. I'll have to ask her. But her leopard gecko was like hundreds of dollars, along with her bearded dragon. I think they go for like $800 in New Zealand, which is crazy. But I'm going to get back on track here and talk about skinks. So the next skink up is the Tiliqua Rugosa, also known as the Shingleback. These are some of the coolest skinks. They look like pine cones. They have really bumpy scales, and they can't drop their tails. So they're gonna be the type of lizard that they can't drop their tail whatsoever for a defense mechanism. So it's really interesting, and they're just probably the most interesting looking Tiliqua species of all, because they're just so cool. They literally look like a little pine cone. They're also very interesting because the young are raised in family colonies and they mate for life. So they're very family-oriented skinks, and that's so cute and adorable, and they're so unique. I think they're the most unique of all of the different subspecies. But because of that, they are usually a price tag of $4,000 to $5,000. And the very last skink that I'm going to be covering today is the Tiliqua SPP, also known as the Irian Jaya. And this is actually the type of skink that my friend Michelle has. So this skink also has a higher humidity level requirement of 60 to 80%. They are kind of known as the oddballs of the Tiliquas because they're not considered true blue-tongued skinks. They're still categorized under Tiliqua because scientists just didn't know what to do with them, which is really funny. They look exactly like all the other skinks, so I'm not entirely sure why they aren't a true blue-tongued skink or Tiliqua. But they do have speckled forelimbs and brown bands with minimal speckling in between, and that is kind of how you can tell them apart from the others. They usually go from $125 to $250, so they're really cool skinks. I'm gonna have to look more into them because I found that really interesting that they kind of aren't technically a true blue-tongued skink because they look exactly like them. So I'm gonna have to do more research. If you guys are aware, let me know in a comment because I'm really interested about that. And that is all of the different subspecies of the blue-tongued skinks that I'm going to be covering today. So I really hope that this video was helpful, especially if you aren't sure which type of a skink that you have. It's good to be extra sure because you know how sometimes people can sell skinks and they'll say it's one thing and that ends up being another thing. Just want to make sure that you're giving it the proper care for the proper skink. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that this was helpful. I will see you in the next one, and I'm gonna leave you with a clip of Chancho being adorable. So I'll see you guys next time.